Welcome back. This is the big story tonight, focusing on the petitions that will have been lodged and might possibly be lodged within the next few hours at the Supreme Court, challenging the re-election of President-elect Uhuru Kenyatta. Before we go to you, Mr. Omtata, just like a quick reaction from you, Steve Ogola. We've just seen, before we took the break, another petition that's been filed by George Bush of the Black Flag Movement. Your very quick reaction to that.
As you've rightly pointed out, challenging the election of the president-elect. That's a very important phrase, and that will guide the court if the court wants to consolidate, which means a presidential election petition must cite the respondents, must be the national returning officer, Chebukati, the IEBC, and the person declared as the president-elect. If you include Raila Odinga or other entities or other persons, that is not a petition properly framed for purposes of challenging the election of the president-elect. So I think if looking at just the way the petition has been drafted, if it lists other parties, then I don't see those petitions getting consolidated or maybe being heard simultaneously or concurrently.
Yeah, it would be important to note that one, as well as the issue of funds. We'll come to you in just a moment as to whether the Supreme Court can waiver those funds that are required. But Omtata, remind us again about your prayers, because we know that you went before Justice Mativo before this. He said he had no jurisdiction, which then got you to the Supreme Court. So remind us again what your prayers are before the Supreme Court. What are you seeking?
Very basic. I'm seeking, one, a determination of the consequences of the decision by the NASA candidates to abandon the 26th of October election. I'm also seeking to determine if at all the law that was in place, whether the decision in Raila Odinga 2013 is one of the election laws that was supposed to be observed. And then I would also be seeking to determine whether the decision of the High Court after the Raila Odinga exit had any consequences on the August 26th election. And I'm also seeking to determine the issue of nominations, because you realize that nominations are what kick off an election. And when an election is quashed, the entire process is quashed. So I would be seeking also to find the Supreme Court to tell us how we found some individuals being put on ballot papers, who nominated them, unless we are saying that we are going by the decision by the Supreme Court to nominate people when it interpreted Article 140 or attempted to interpret Article 140 in 2013. So my position is that nomination is really an exercise of the sovereign people. A court cannot nominate. IBC cannot nominate. It's only the people can nominate directly during the elections, during a mechanism created before during the election cycle. Otherwise, we also have only one place in the Constitution whereby the people through the Constitution nominated who can vie during a by-election. And that's Article 138, I think, Clause 5, where it is clearly stated who can vie during a by-election, and we are given 30 days because the candidates are nominated. In the other place, we have got Article 140, it gives us 60 days, which to me anticipates a nomination. Then you go to Article 138.8, it anticipates, it gives you an election within 60 days, which means it anticipates a nomination. You go to 139, there are two scenarios there, which also anticipate an election. And I'm saying that the 60 days in 140 should be read with the 60 days in other parts of the Constitution, and see that there's a need for a nomination to kickstart a fresh election. Because when the court rendered this decision, it invalidated the election, which means it invalidated everything up to the nominations. And we have got examples when a court invalidates an election of an MP, it also goes to the heart of the matter, and we have fresh nominations when we have a by-election. We don't just say that those who vied are those who continue. So one of the things I'll be asking the court to determine is really who is supposed to participate where an election, where an election has been nullified under Article 140.
Okay.
And so those are among the issues that are doing, but are framed within a constitutional petition and not necessarily an election petition.
Okay, all right. Okoiti Omtata, thank you for that. Let's go to Haki Africa Executive Director Hussein Khalid. Before we took the break, and in fact, before we went to see what was happening at the Supreme Court, you were talking about what you claim is intimidation of members of civil society who may be thinking of petitioning this process.
Yes, Yvonne, and thank you again. Like I said, Article 36 is very clear of the Constitution of Kenya that every person has the right to join, form, or participate in the activities of an association of any kind. And I think for us as civil society, it's a point of what do the authorities really want? We know that there have been situations where certain groups have called for demonstrations. We know that there have been situations where certain groups have called for economic sabotage, and some groups have even called for, like, stripping and things like that to send their message out. What civil society is doing is actually going to the courts, staying within the confines of the law to have an issue addressed. Yet, despite the fact that we are actually using the law to allow different citizens to express their concerns, we are seeing intimidation from different stakeholders, particularly from the state, actually targeting civil society. And as civil society, we need to speak very openly and very freely that we are here to represent the views of the people.
Hussein, you believe that this is all linked to the presidential election petitions at the Supreme Court?
Oh, definitely. We believe that because, first of all, the organizations that have been targeted, take the example of Muhuri, which is a local organization based here in Mombasa. They have been, in the last few weeks, of course, presenting petitions in court, specifically Khalif Khalifa and Hassan Abdile, who is the executive director of Muhuri. They presented the case on the returning officers, and we believe that this case of intimidation is specifically as a result of that particular petition that they presented to court. Look at the timing of when it has happened. As you said earlier in the program, Yvonne, on the last day, when the petitions are supposed to be filed is exactly the day that the NGO board has decided to summon them to appear and present themselves and explain or account for matters that are not even clear. They say, oh, FRC is investigating, the KRA, and there are no clear allegations of what exactly it is that they will be responding to. And these, of course, are operations that have happened before. Haki Africa itself has been in this situation, and we understand that sometimes these are, we as civil society, we are not against regulations. We understand that, we have to operate within the confines of the law, but when these things happen at this point in time, it actually even presents the state itself negatively, not just to civil society, but to Kenyans at large. Because why now? That's the question that we're asking. If these reports were filed from, March, when the deadline, 31st of March is the deadline when these reports are filed, why wait until after the 26th of October to demand that these institutions present themselves to you? Where were you all this time? And why do it this time? Why can't you do it next week or next month and so on and so forth?
Okay, so Hussein, just a quick one then. I know a number of civil society organizations at the coast have asked Khalif Khalifa and his colleague to ignore the summons. Is that correct?
Yes, I think for us as a civil society network, of course, seeking legal advice from different stakeholders from locally here and also at the national level, that is the advice that we were able to get because we don't see the merits in this matter. But of course, the legal representative was there to actually confirm what the allegations are so that even when they go to present themselves, then they are clear on what the allegations are.
All right, Hussein Khalid, Executive Director of Haki Africa, thank you very much for your thoughts on that. Steve Ogola, I'd like to finish with you because there's so many petitions, not just before the Supreme Court, but elsewhere as well. I'd like your final comment on this one. There's a lawyer, Kelvin Jihia, who's filed a petition to the JSC seeking the removal of 3 judges. I mean, a lot's happening that would affect whatever happens at the Supreme Court. What are your thoughts on this one?
That petition is dead on arrival. It will not be determined because it will have the intended consequence of that petition is to make the Supreme Court unable to sit. Now, there are judicial authorities or decisions that say the court is required to take judicial notice of those allegations that have been raised by one person or another, but nonetheless will continue to sit and make a determination. You can't ask the court to recuse itself in a manner that makes it impossible to perform its function. But number two, Yvonne, most importantly, my message to the court is this. There's a lot of issues being raised and a lot of concerns being raised by Kenyans. Kenyans are anxious. I think it's better for this court to make a determination based on what they believe is their reading of the law and the evidence available. If there's evidence available that would support a nullification, they should do so. If there's evidence if the evidence does not support a nullification, they should also do so. Because this is a court that has already invalidated an election, and they should progress in that manner, if only to consolidate their legacy. And also, number two, to entrench the rule of law. And lastly, to also create that avenue that people can go to court to ventilate their issues. Because the moment people stop going to court, they probably be going elsewhere, and that elsewhere is an unpredictable path we don't know.
And that's an important point. In just a minute, Steve, what would you say to, I mean, there's some who have, fatigue with this process. We've just been through one. Here we are again with another petition at the Supreme Court. In fact, I believe there were some protesters outside the Supreme Court today saying, just do away with this process already and swear in the president-elect. While it is the right of some people to go to the Supreme Court and seek redress, just talk to us about the environment in which the Supreme Court judges will be sitting to hear these matters in a country that's quite fatigued with electoral processes and indeed, legal processes as well.
Kenyans should not be fatigued. We are animating the Constitution. The Constitution, if it's understood well, rests on 4 pillars. Number one, the first pillar is this robust framework that allows every Kenyan, not just a candidate, to challenge the election result. Number two is a vigilant public. And what you have seen is that a public that wants to hold the election managers to account, and let us not delegitimize such voices. Number three is an independent judiciary, a judiciary that is impervious to executive manipulation. This is a major investment that was never before in our constitution, pre-2010 constitution. Then number four is a matching culture, and I think we still have a long way to go in terms of creating a culture that matches the expectation of the constitution. Indeed, Yvonne, the beneficial aspect in all this petition is that people are continuously requiring IBC to account for its actions. I think that's beneficial for Kenyans who may feel like we want to move on. We cannot move on. Part of the electoral process ends with election dispute resolution. That is why there's a whole judiciary bench book on election that to train judges on how to resolve this election dispute resolution. So until we are done with this election petition, the countries we are still in part of that continuum of election resolution.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I see Hussein Khalid nodding his head while you were speaking there. You raise an important point. If we're not going to the courts, where else are we going? So it's important for us to perhaps resolve these issues within the structures that we have created for ourselves in Kenya's constitution. Thank you very much, Hussein Khalid, Executive Director, Haki Africa, Steve Ogola, Advocate of the High Court. My thanks as well to Okoiti Omtata, who is an activist, speaking to us about his petition. On behalf of myself, the crew, and our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, we thank you very much for watching The Big Story tonight, which will continue to unfold, and you will get the full story. You'll get the whole story here on KTN News, and that continues up next with Linda Gutu on KTN Prime. Good night. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole.